Oh, well. Hello, are you sitting there eating my sandwich?
Okay, how you guys doing today? All right, we're gonna go ahead and start now. I want to welcome everybody to our September general meeting. This is obviously Tortoise Group. If you're in the wrong room, you're welcome to stay. So a couple administrative things I want to go over. We have a guest speaker today, Lesley DeFalco from USGS, and Lesley's going to be sharing with us some interesting information about various desert plant species, and specifically some of the work that her group is doing with tortoises and what tortoises do in the wild, basically. It'd be pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to this. Let you guys know, we got awarded something pretty cool. The Nevada Department of Wildlife awarded us the Kirch Conservation Award, and we just got this award 2 days ago. Yeah, right? So I will tell you what I told the county commission when we got it. I'd love to say thank you, but it's really for our volunteers. So how many of you guys volunteer here? Raise your hand. I know several of you guys volunteer. Thank you. Thank you for volunteering, because in Tortoise Group, there's me, Sarah, and Amanda, who is going to have her baby in about 3 days, and that's it in terms of employees. The work that we do statewide, you guys, we've got volunteers up in Reno and Washoe County, as well as Churchill County and Lyon County, down here in Clark County. We've got over 150 volunteers statewide. So we can do all this work because of our volunteers. Thank you, thank you. So that's a good question. We need a nice office to hang it in, but
That's not gonna happen.
yes, it will. Gotta have faith. We're gonna have an office at some point. We're gonna have an office, a nice museum, nice tortoise habitat. We're gonna get there. It's gonna take some time, but we're gonna get there. So that's pretty cool. And it's a conservation award, and specifically what it is recognizing what our volunteers, what you guys have been doing out with tortoise conservation. So that's pretty good stuff. Having said that, we need volunteers. We got a cool jelly roll project coming up. Those of you that were doing jelly roll last year know about it. Sarah's going to talk a little bit about it. Lesley, are you going to go over the jelly? Yeah. And Lesley will definitely go over jelly rolling because it affects what she's doing. And we also need help building burrows over the winter time. This year what we're going to do is we're going to keep pushing for adoptions, and when folks sign up to adopt, we're going to try to get folks to build their burrows over the winter time, because it's not 120 degrees outside. So if we can get folks to build their burrow over the winter time, by the time the tortoises wake up, we can start slinging tortoises to people that have homes ready for them. So we do need volunteers over the winter time. September 25th through the 28th. I'm going to send several emails out about this, and we're also putting it on Facebook, and we're going to push it very heavily. NV Energy has a contest called the Power of Good contest, and basically what it is a $10,000 gift that they're going to give to a nonprofit in the environmental field if they get enough votes. So as long as you're a citizen of the state of Nevada, please you can vote once a day. So there's 3 days to do it. I plan on voting every single day. That'll come in an email. Is everybody getting emails from us? If you don't get emails, then it's real simple. Just click on the website. It says I want to receive emails. But having said all that, on the 25th, 26th, and the 25th through the 28th, please vote. All the information will be at NV Energy, and you can do all this online, and we're going to push it on Facebook and on our website. That is worth $10,000, so please vote for us. Do you guys know what STEM is? STEM? And they've added an A into it. Sometimes it's called STEAM, but anybody heard STEM? Yeah. Okay, so it's a teaching initiative, and it stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. Sarah came up with an awesome idea to basically, we get requests from the Clark County School District to come talk about tortoises. But then there's kind of a dead space where it's not just tortoises, but it's science in general. And the schools themselves want help with their curriculum. So this year, we started a STEM program at Gehring Elementary, and it's a 9-week course, and Sarah is teaching it for first and second graders, and we're teaching science, technology, engineering, and math under the auspices of a tortoise. So for instance, I think it's lesson 6 or 7 is light. One of the lessons is about light. Now, we're going to teach photons and all this to first and second graders. No. What we're teaching them is how light travels, look, what it does in a mirror, and we use a burrow, a tortoise burrow, as an example. So we can shine a light in a burrow, use a what do you call it? A mirror. We use a flashlight, but the mirror takes the light. And so we're teaching kids about science under the auspices of a desert tortoise. It's really cool. So that's something awesome that Sarah's doing right now. Let you guys know too, on Wednesday of last week, we all went out to the boonies, way up on Highway 93, I think, up towards past Apex, out near Coyote Springs, and we released 62 juvenile tortoises into previously burned area. Having said that, please don't ever release your tortoises into the wild. Pets don't make good wild tortoises for a whole bunch of different reasons, but these tortoises were raised in captivity. They spent the last 3 years being looked at very carefully by USGS. What's that?
Did some of mine get killed?
No, yours were too big. Yours were too big. But all of your tortoises we've adopted out, Cheryl. So they all have good homes now. But this was pretty cool, and we went up with USGS. There were like 18 or 19 folks, and we had little plots of land, and we dumped off 5 tortoises in specific areas. And it's really cool because we're not just looking at pets. We're looking at the entire tortoise life cycle, and we're a part of it. So again, thank you to our volunteers that helped out, because the folks that have been volunteering down at the old DTCC, caring for the juvies and the hatchlings, those are the tortoises that we released out into the wild. So that's really good stuff. That's a 3-year project, and it's ongoing. We have if you have not registered your tortoise, please do so. Please do so. Please register your tortoise. Register your tortoise early. Register your tortoise often, right? We did a census, and we sent out a bunch of mailers into Clark County. Right now, it looks like there's almost as, if not more, tortoises in captivity in Clark County as there are in the entire Mojave Desert. So it's kind of a shocking thing, and it's because of the work that we're doing that we're gonna be able to present this to the scientific community and say, look, desert tortoises in captivity do have some purpose besides just being a pet, which is awesome. I'm not saying that that's not a negative thing, but we are partnering now with the scientific community and looking at ways that we can take the information from the tortoises in your backyard and keep the preservation of the species going. So all this is really good stuff, and it's all because of the work of our volunteers, and I want to thank you guys. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and then Lesley will give us her nice presentation. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Kobe. So I'm briefly just going to touch on current events and go into a couple more details than Kobe went into as far as volunteer opportunities and what Tortoise Group has been up to. And then we're briefly going to touch on brumation and how to prepare your tortoise for brumation. And then we'll be tossing it over to Lesley so we can hear all about these the desert restoration project that's going on that we've been assisting with. So currently, right now, we're at 70 adoptions for Southern Nevada. We'll probably be doing anywhere from 5 to 10 more in the last push of the season. Northern Nevada ended their season with 44 adoptions, so that's really awesome. And here's some really cute pictures from the STEM program that we just started. So as Kobe mentioned, we are partnering with Gehring Academy, and what they needed was a way to fill a before school program. Actually, they have a couple for 3rd and 4th graders, and the need was for 1st and 2nd graders, so we get them really little. And the very first meeting we had, we actually had some hatchlings that the kids got to see before we handed them over to USGS, and they were so excited. The very first thing, I had a little girl raise her hand, and she says, are we going to get to touch a tortoise? And I said, I have a very special surprise for you. So we are still working with Nevada Department of Wildlife and doing tortoise telemetry out at Red Rock. So if any of you guys enjoy hiking out at Red Rock, we would love to have you on board and helping find these guys, because they can be tricky, and it's actually really, really fun, because you're just hiking out in the desert and you're getting to see wild tortoises in their natural habitat and learning about them. You'd be surprised how high these guys climb. It's pretty amazing. So as Kobe mentioned, this past Wednesday we helped out with USGS's first translocation of the juvenile tortoises that you volunteers have been helping to care for. There was the first batch of 63 that went out. So here they're all in little cups, soaking, being ready to be placed out. They were nice and plump and hopefully are doing well. They all have individual transmitters on there, so USGS will be keeping track of every single one of those guys. A lot of work. So we did just finish our last wellness clinic of the year. I know a few of you were there helping out, so we appreciate it. Thank you very much. We could not be as successful with our wellness clinics without your help. This year alone, we were able to see over 200 tortoises between the 5 clinics. So we hope to continue that in future seasons and keep bringing in new people, because every single one of these people is a new person. I mean, I'm sure a couple of people from previous years, but we've been getting more and more people every year that have been showing up to the wellness clinic, so that's really awesome. So we still need help at the emergency habitat as we're wrapping up the season. Volunteers go out there Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and they feed and water the tortoises. Here we have Walter, who is a volunteer favorite. He's been adopted out since, but he's thriving in his new home, and he's like practically smiling in that picture. It's so cute. As Kobe mentioned, we will be starting up the Jelly Roll project again, which I'm sure Lesley will be able to go into more detail. But essentially, volunteers meet out at Lake Mead at the nursery there. And what we're doing is we're taking seedlings and putting them into a wet pet pad, basically, and rolling it up so that it's easier for transport when the groups from GBI go out and bring them and help them plant. So it's a lot easier for them to carry something that's lighter than these entire pods. Each of these are filled with dirt, and typically when they're wet, they weigh anywhere from 40 to 50 pounds. So the jelly rolling really helps cut down that weight when they're transporting them out to these desolate locations. So again, just thank you, volunteers. Kobe emphasized it, but I can't emphasize it enough. We appreciate you so much, because we've had more and more projects coming on every season, and we have people donating their time, and we really appreciate the hard work and effort that you guys put into that. Yes. Everyone should give it. Okay, now jumping into typical fall behavior. I know it doesn't quite feel like it, but it has been cooling off at night. I know we're still hitting the 100 degrees during the day, but we will be seeing those lower temperatures, and our tortoises will soon be going to sleep for the winter. So as fall comes on, we're seeing these cooler temperatures. Your tortoises are pretty active right now, but they will start to slow down as temperatures cool. They'll be spending more time in their burrow, they'll be eating less, and slowing down for brumation. So when, where, and how long will my tortoise brumate? I get all of these questions, and very worried custodians, especially their first season with their tortoise. So typically, when outside temperatures are getting colder is when your tortoise is thinking about going into brumation. So the longer we have of a warm fall, the longer your tortoise will be up. But it also depends on the individual tortoise. So they do have an internal clock that tells them when to go to sleep. And I'm sure that some of you have a pretty good idea of when your tortoise has gone to sleep in previous years. if this is your first year with your tortoise, then I would recommend making a note of when they do go down. Where should my tortoise brumate? This is their natural habitat, so they should be outside, hopefully in a well-insulated burrow. If a well-insulated burrow is not available, there are instructions on our website on how to properly brumate a tortoise in an unheated room or shed or in your garage until you can get an outside burrow set up. So how long do they brumate for? So they typically go down mid-October. I know a lot of the tortoises didn't go down till later in the season, last season, because we had quite a warm fall. I think our very last tortoise that went down was the first week of December, actually, last year. And then they typically are waking up anywhere from mid-March, April, sometimes even as late as May. And I know it's really nerve-wracking when you hear of other people's tortoises waking up in the spring and yours is still asleep, but we always have late risers. I mean, last year we had one tortoise that was still asleep at Mother's Day. So it's not, they know what they're doing, they know how to do it best. So brumation tips, we recommend giving your tortoise a nice long soak before they go into brumation to make sure they're nice and hydrated. How you can do that is placing them in a Rubbermaid bin or a bathtub, a shallow pool. You basically are filling the bin up with tepid water, lukewarm water, halfway up its shell, allowing the tortoise to submerge if it chooses, but able to keep its head above water if it also chooses to do so. Especially with juveniles, this is important just because they have a harder time maintaining hydration. So as I mentioned before, some tortoises will slow down and stop eating several weeks before they go down into brumation. And I know a lot of you guys have little piggies that will eat up until the day they go down. So either way works, but if your tortoise isn't eating, that's not something to be concerned about when it's approaching brumation season. Some people will crinkle newspaper and stick it in the entrance of their tortoise burrow to reduce air circulation coming into the burrow. That's pretty much up to you. And if it does rain, you'll want to be removing that newspaper because you don't want it to be holding on to moisture. Sometimes you'll get lucky and your tortoise will come out during brumation season because they can sense oncoming rain. So if we get a nice rainfall during the winter season, you may be lucky and have a tortoise sighting. But otherwise, they're going to be down for the count, and you don't have to worry about feeding them or watering them until springtime. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Lesley DeFalco with USGS, and she's going to be talking about the Desert Restoration Project and a lot of cool things.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to be here today to talk about tortoise habitat. I'm a plant ecologist by training, but I've been studying tortoises since probably 1986. 88. Because I love plants so much, I do love tortoises, but I love plants as well. I do study what they eat and what kind of plants they use for building their burrows underneath. And I found that even though I thought I was going to just study plants, all these other animals keep coming into my studies over and over again. So I'm guessing that, I really need to take an ecosystem approach and appreciate that we're all connected in many different ways, and so are the animals and the plants that we live with out here in the desert. Today I'm going to talk about restoring desert tortoise habitat. We've had some incredible burns over the last several years, and I'm going to talk in particular about burns that we experienced, or fires that came through in 2005 and 2006. Seems like a really long time ago, but those fires are still really important today when we think about desert tortoise habitat. Advance, next slide. So in our Mojave Desert, when you're driving between here and St. George, Utah, or you're driving down to Los Angeles, you go through shrubland habitat. You see creosote bush and these smaller plants that are associated with creosote bush called Bur Sage. And then, of course, the Joshua trees, right? You all know these species pretty well? I see some heads going up and down. Okay. Those are really important lands for the wild desert tortoises to live in, and so tortoises will live in these low and middle elevation shrublands. They're just barely getting up into what's called blackbrush. That's the right-hand photograph there. It has that darker vegetation in the foreground, and then those tall Joshua trees that so many of us love and know so well. On the left-hand side, that's sort of the typical lower elevation creosote bush, Bur Sage. It looks a little less vegetated, and there's a more open space in between. But tortoises, this is where they hang out in the wild, and they need to make it in this habitat. It's really difficult because of course, you only get about 4 inches of rainfall a year where we live here in the Mojave. So not much water, which means not much vegetation. And we also have a lot of solar radiation, which as an ectothermic herbivore, which means that they rely on their environment for heating up and cooling down. It presents some challenges. In the summertime, they have to shuttle between shrubs to stay cool and get into the shade. And in the wintertime, they usually stay below ground, but they need those shrubs still for making their burrows, because the root systems make the integrity of their holes really suitable for hanging out for the entire winter. Well, in 2005 and 2006, do you all remember the wildfires that we had around the city? We had about 1 million acres that burned or reburned during that time period, which is about 4% of the total shrublands that we have here in the Mojave Desert. The Mojave Desert extends into Southern California, Southern Nevada, northwestern Arizona, and a little bit of the southwestern tip of Utah. So that's, even 4% seems like a small number, but that's in 1 year, one time period, that was a lot of habitat, or a lot of shrubland habitat to burn. And that also means that about 5% of the federally designated habitat under the Endangered Species Act was impacted by these fires. This is the top right map just shows you kind of where we are in the Mojave Desert. That's that gray, sort of Mickey Mouse shaped gray blob. That's the Mojave Desert. And then I just wanted to show you in this lower figure that with these fires that we experienced, which are the red and the blue, the red from 2005 and the 2006 is in the blue, these were all scattered fires. But you can see in the northeast Mojave Desert where we are, we had quite a bit of fires during that period. Okay, so something that not a lot of people know, when we think about wildfires, we're thinking a lot about what's going on in California. We think about western lands that are burning and they're impacting habitations for humans. Well, that system is typically adapted to deal with fire, but our system, our plants, do not do very well with burn injury. And that's why, the reason why is because these are fueled by invasive annual grasses. And maybe some of you have been walking out in the desert and you get those little stickers in your socks, those little burrs from the brome grass. And what happens is that those grasses, and you can see in the right photograph at the Jacob 06 fire, it comes into these areas after it burns and reestablishes, and it burns again and again and again. And these are invasive species that have come over from Europe and Asia, and they've been here since the late 1800s. They don't seem to be leaving anytime soon. So we have to try to figure out how we're going to deal with the potential loss of desert tortoise habitat from these recurrent fires, and what does that mean for our wild populations? These fires have multiple effects on tortoise habitat. They disrupt what are called these fertile islands beneath the shrubs. And beneath the shrubs you get seeds being captured for plants that tortoises need to eat. You get nutrients for growing those plants. We also have this altered disturbance regime where we keep getting fires over and over and over again. It keeps destroying habitat, making it less suitable over time if it burns multiple times. And then we also get a depletion of the seeds. The really cool thing about the Mojave Desert is that it holds all of its seeds for future generations in the top inch of soil. I mean, it's extraordinary if you think about it. Those seeds are there for decades, just waiting for the best conditions for growing up into new plants for tortoises, or for food for tortoises, or for new shrubs that they can use for shuttling between during the summertime. These species on the right-hand side are the invasive annual species that are causing some of the problems. The top one is brome grass, the middle one is Mediterranean grass, and the bottom one is storkbill. And you probably have seen some of these around town yourself. But the one that's on top is the one that's causing the biggest problem with regard to fires. And this is kind of hard to see, but this is showing you a landscape where we have a fire. You can see kind of the lighter foreground here, that burn line, and that's a huge amount of habitat. And so the question is, can tortoises even use that habitat anymore, or have they lost that, and now they have nowhere to go? You not only have the loss of individuals that burn up in a fire, but now you have potentially poor quality habitat that they can't move back into. So this is a question that's the burning question that we restoration ecologists are very interested in trying to solve. So we've been doing this for several years now, since those 2005 and 06 fires. There's a bunch of sites that I've represented here where we've been studying for about, well, more than 10 years, trying to look at various techniques for getting vegetation back on the landscape that the tortoises need. And through that time period, we've been developing a lot of emerging tools that land managers, such as the folks with the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, people who are interested in conserving tortoise habitat and maintaining populations into the future, these are the techniques that we're testing to see how well they do for restoring habitat. And we've been applying herbicides and having really good success. This is just kind of a summary of some of those techniques. And herbicides we've been using, you can see in the top left corner, there's kind of a blue hue on the ground, and that's the person who's applying herbicide is just doing it on a little experimental plot just to test and see how well it is at suppressing those invasive species that are problematic and trying to release all the native species that we really want to have for tortoise food and for tortoise cover. We've been finding really good success with that. You put it down in the fall, and next spring, you've got pretty much a reduction of non-natives and an increase in the native species. We also have been adding native seeds, so seeds that we collect or are bought from commercial buyers or sellers, and we go ahead and we spread those after we've applied herbicide. And we found that it takes a little bit more time than people think, but we can get some of the species coming back that we use from some of these seed mixes. The problem is that a lot of those seeds, and I'll talk about this in a moment, that do well are those from really short-lived species. So I don't know if you all have some desert landscaping in your yard, but you probably have some plants that you get from the nursery and they grow, but then they might die after 2 or 3 years, and they might reseed if they're really prolific at producing their own seed, but sometimes you have to keep getting those at the nursery over and over again if you want those to continue. Whereas we have these other species like creosote bush and Bur Sage and the Joshua tree, which are very long-lived species, and they just don't come into these areas very well with broadcast seeding. And this is a real problem because we could be continuing to seed over and over again with the best seed mix that's going to respond the most quickly. The problem is that those species eventually die in the short term, and there's nothing to replace them to provide suitable habitat in the long term. Another technique that we've been experimenting with is outplanting, and we've had some pretty good success with survival, but again, these are woody species, these species that are living a little bit longer than those short-lived species, which I'll show you in a moment, but they're the ones that, the ones that do well are still relatively short-lived compared to, again, the creosote bush, the Bur Sage, and the Joshua tree. I'm going to keep focusing on those 3 species because that's going to lead up to the jelly rolling effort, which I'll talk about at the very end. We've also done some seed encapsulation, which is kind of a fun idea, and maybe some of you have volunteered for that, helping out Bureau of Land Management, but they've been creating seed balls, which is down here in this bottom left picture, and you put the seeds into a clay ball and you put it out on the landscape, and that seems kind of strange. Why would you put seed into a ball? Well, we have a lot of rodents and ants that love to steal the seed, and in fact, some of our research shows that you can lose about 85% of the seed that you throw out there, because it's just sitting there on the surface waiting to be eaten by somebody, and there's a lot of somebodies out there. There's kangaroo rats, there's deer mice, there's ants, all sorts of really cool stuff that's out there moving the seeds around, and they're eating a lot of it, but they're also moving it around, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. So we're using some of these seed encapsulation methods as well. But today I'm mostly going to talk about native seeding and outplanting as it relates to some of this recent work that we're doing. So I wanted to just kind of drive home the point of those early colonizing species or those short-lived species. That top left picture is of desert globe mallow. It's that orange flowered subshrub. It only lasts for about 3 to 5 years. Does anybody know about desert globe mallow? Okay, globe mallow. Yeah. Okay, tortoises love to eat it. It's great. It's a great native species to plant into your gardens if you want good tortoise food and you want to have some natural species. This is just a figure. I'm not going to show too many data slides today, but this is a picture from a study we did looking at how tortoises moved into the fires after those 2005-06 fires. Because we were seeing a lot of recovery from the short-lived species such as the globe mallow. And as you can see from 2007, and we were kind of chunking along here, it doesn't matter really about all those lines, but just looking at the general trend, tortoises are moving deeper and deeper into the fire up until about 2010. And then things started changing where the tortoises were moving out of those fires. Well, that was kind of curious, and the tortoise biologists were scratching their heads, and then they came down the hall and they said, "What can you make of this, Lesley?" And I said, "Well, what's going on with the vegetation?" And they thought about annual plant species because tortoises need a lot of annual plants for forage. That's what they eat when they're out there in the wild. But I said, let's also look at the perennial species. And indeed what we saw is that we see an increase. This is just the percentage of the cover that you see out there. And it was also increasing until about 2010. And then it started decreasing. And you also see dead plant material, dead cover increasing. So again, that's just indicative of this pattern where we have these short-lived species. They're short-lived for a reason. They make it for a little bit and then they get really big. And tortoises say, oh, I'm going to go in there and eat it. And I'm also going to use it for cover. But then once those adults die, tortoises are like, whoa, there's not enough cover anymore. We got to go back into these adjacent unburned areas and try to find some better cover. Okay. So what we're trying to do now with that study, so many years later, is we're trying to bring the tortoise into the whole restoration fold. How can we actually join what we're learning with our restoration with what the tortoise needs? And so we've been working with a lot of tortoise biologists, including Christina Drake, who I think spoke to you recently with the tortoise group. And she's up there in the top left corner with a big grin on her face. She's got her hands on a tortoise. She's been helping with some of these small tortoises and trying to understand what their blood work tells about their health and their well-being and what we're doing. And as Kobe mentioned, several of us in the room, I see Bob, I see Kobe and Sarah. We're all out there on Wednesday releasing these little tortoises, and we released them in the areas that we restored, where we had that nice seed response, where we got a lot of perennials getting in there, the short-lived perennials, and then we put them in areas that are called control groups, so where they haven't had any kind of seeding. What we want to do is see if their health and well-being changes with regard to the restoration effort, right? So if you restore an area, it's kind of like if you build it, will they come? And so that's what we're trying to address with some of this research. And so you can see some of the photos on Wednesday where we're releasing tortoises in the shade of some of these yuccas. And then we were carrying them out, as Kobe was saying, with these each individual containers. And then we would release them, and there's a hole in the background. This one in particular, I think you remember this one, Bob, kind of went in there and turned around and said, well, maybe I can find something better. And so what we're trying to see now is if they can get settled in before the winter comes. I didn't have time to put the map in here, but I wanted to give you an update. All the tortoises the day later were still alive, which is thumbs up, because we weren't sure if maybe they would die from predators. Predators might find them and eat them. Also, they might be exposed being on the surface, but no, they're all still there. And they're moving around quite a bit. And it looks like the ones that are in the unburned area are moving around less, probably because they have more cover. And the ones that are in these burned areas where there's less vegetation, they have to try to figure out, wow, where am I going to brumate this year? I got to find a good place. We humans tried to find adequate space for them when we released them, but what do we know? We don't know much about tortoise, apartment hunting. So these guys are still out there looking around, but they're all alive as of Thursday. That's good news. Okay, so just getting back to this kind of a habitat. It's burned. This one's burned once. It looks pretty bleak, and we have lost a lot of the components that are really important. These Joshua trees are all burned, and so they're going to topple over in the next big wind. They'll be toppled over, and they won't provide good shade for tortoises for building a burrow underneath. You can't even see barely the creosote bush. They're just little tiny nubbins over here. They need to have those big shrubs for providing cover for them in the wintertime as well as the summertime. Okay. So we're kind of coming up with some novel approaches. We understand that, yes, ants and rodents, they move a lot of seed around, and they eat a lot of that seed, but they also move a lot of the seed around, which is a positive thing. So what we're trying to do is create shrub islands in our restoration work so that we can, instead of having to tackle the huge areas that we see that get burned, we can make these little islands that over time, once they're established, will sort of grow out of those nuclei and into the larger part of the burned areas. But we're going to see if these guys can help us. So we have 3 different treatments that we're playing around with for this landscape restoration project. And the idea here is that the seeds can be dispersed from these islands into other areas and create new islands. I'm not going to talk about the seed predator part. That was the part I spoke about earlier with regard to the seed encapsulation. I'm just going to talk about developing these shrub islands and encouraging rodents to move the stuff around for us, the seeds around for us. Okay. So can we create habitat islands? Well, we know that we've had some success in developing shrub islands from outplanted material. So these are plants that are grown up in the nursery. These are pictures of the Nevada joint fir on the left, or some people know those as Mormon tea, and also the blackbrush over here on the right. The Nevada joint fir is, again, sort of a shorter lived shrub, and we were really successful at reestablishing it by taking the nursery grown stuff and putting it out in the wild. 61% survived under that effort, but the blackbrush, again, is that those older or those longer lived species, they have just a total set of traits that make them really hard to establish. And we only had 4% of those established after 3.5 years. And we actually tried a bunch of soil moisture amendments. We were adding water. We had volunteers that came out and watered them monthly for some of them, and some of them we just let go as is. We had these different absorbent materials that we would add to the hole and see if that would help them. But really, factors other than soil moisture amendments really corresponded with the higher survival, and it was usually where you were planted, how much rainfall you received in that particular place, whether or not you had herbivore protection, and so on. So this is kind of a little schematic of this landscape restoration project, and I want to add that even though I'm here presenting today, and as probably alluded to, this is a really big project that requires a lot of other researchers. We work with Bureau of Land Management. We also work with Fish and Wildlife Service, since they have to watch the recovery of the desert tortoise. We work with a lot of groups, public groups like Desert Tortoise Group. And so it's a really huge effort that just not one entity can really take care of. But these are the habitat islands that I described earlier, what they might look like on the landscape. And so this is just again showing you in this burned area, which is the lighter colored habitat, that these habitat islands would be established, and then they would grow outward. Now we're also incorporating herbicide application to try to reduce the non-natives, and I think that's shown in the next slide. What we usually do, there's 12 fires that we're going to be treating over the period of 3 years. Last year was our first year. We're currently in the middle of our second year, and then 2019 is our third year of applying these different treatments. Why, you might ask? Well, when you're trying to outplant from the nursery 30,000, well actually it's 90,000 plants over 3 years, it's really hard to do that in 1 year. And in fact, last year, the outplanting, all these seedlings that were transferred from the nursery to the field, it took us from October through December. So it's a really big effort to get the people out there, to dig the holes, to bring the water. These are remote places. This isn't your backyard. So it's a huge logistical nightmare to get all of this mobilized to make it work. These are pictures of the herbicide application. We're doing two types. We've got aerial application from an airplane. Those are at 3 of the 4 fires. And we have one that's happening by manual application, again with a boom sprayer. And the reason why we have the manual application in only one of those fires is up at Red Rock, in that area. And so we can't have aerial application where we have a lot of the public. We don't want to impact the public. So this is all done very close to the ground, so there's no drift. And you can kind of see what a fuel break looks like. You can see that bare area. There's a lot of native species that are still there, but all that non-native grass that's in between those shrubs, it's gone. And that's the kind of effect that we see with the herbicide application. And then these 2 pictures of the yellow card on the left is before the application. This is a moisture sensitive paper, and then after the application. So we do that just to make sure that, you know, if an airplane way up in the sky, when it actually flies through and hits these areas that we've designated as research plots, we find that they actually do receive the herbicide. And they have, thankfully, all received herbicide. I think there's this one showing a little dot there, and that occasionally happens when you get any kind of wind. But for the most part, we have great research designed for testing these treatments. Okay. Landscape restoration, the sowing the seeds occurs during the summer. We do this in July, which is 110. It can be 110, and we're in these remote areas, and you've got a crew of 30 people, an awesome sowing crew. We call them the sowing crew. They're physically going out there. They line up. There's 30 of them, and they walk a 1 hectare plot. And what they do is they have their pole. This is a pipe, a metal pipe with a funnel on the top of it, and they take a couple steps, and then they add their seed, and they cover up the hole, they move a couple more. And so they're doing this for 2 weeks at all these 4 sites, which just seems like kind of crazy, but what we're trying to do is get the seed below the surface so that the ants can't take it. And we put enough out there that the rodents, if they do come in, they won't take all of it, okay? So that's some pictures of the sowing treatment that we do in July. Oh, and why do we do it in July? Does anybody have any idea why we might do that in July? So what we're really concerned about with these 3 species, creosote bush, Bur Sage, and Joshua tree, is that they are intimately tied to germinate and emerge in response to summer rainfall only. And so you have to be out there before the summer rains fall. What was brilliant about this is that as hard as it was to do, in every case it rained an inch, like the day of, the last day, or the day after. It was so perfectly timed. We were just, it was worth it. It was just totally worth it. Even though it was hard to do, it was totally worth it. So stay tuned, and I'll let you know next year how that turns out. Anyways, this is a picture of a creosote seedling and an ambrosia, or the Bur Sage seedling. And I don't have a seedling of the Joshua tree, but it's just one little leaf when it comes out. Okay. Okay, so diversionary seeding, that's the one with the rodents. How are we going to have the rodents help us? So what we are trying to incorporate is an idea that they came up with in the Great Basin Desert. Basically what you try to do is you put the seed that you're trying to plant. So you've got your Bur Sage, your creosote, and your Joshua tree seeds. And if you just put them out there, then the rodents and the ants are going to find them, right? Because there's just so much seed. But if you totally overwhelm the rodents and the ants, so they go out there and they're just like, holy smokes, look at all this seed. They're going to start grabbing all this seed and putting it into what are called caches. So they plant it perfectly below ground. And when they do that, they're trying to keep it away from their neighbor. And so they're constantly moving them and finding them. And one night they're over here, and one night then they pull it and put it over here. So they're constantly moving these seeds around. Well, when they do that, they plant the seeds that we hope that they're going to is going to be reestablished, which is the creosote, Bur Sage, and Joshua tree. And then they get a sort of a treat of having the millet there, because they're going to eat a lot of this. They're going to eat the most abundant seed. So this is the millet that we weighed. We had more than 2 tons that we had to weigh out. That's Sarah Skolshula, who works with me. She's actually got a sort of a smile on her face, but we were really rushing to get all that weighing done before this effort happened. And then this is us just spreading the millet onto the surface of the seed. So this isn't put into the ground with the pipe, it's just spread on the surface. We want the rodents to find it all. We want the rodents to collect it and then stick it under the ground in these little caches. Okay, so that's the diversionary seeding. After we do the diversionary seeding and the sowing treatment in the summer, I've been working with Todd Eskew and Felicia Chen, who are the wildlife ecologists, and they go out, and actually I helped on this effort as well. We go out and trap for 4 nights, and we want to see how many rodents are coming in. Are they being attracted by the fact that we're putting all this seed out there? We kind of hope that's going to be the case. And also, what's the diversity like, and does it change from one site? You know, we're down near south of Mesquite in the Gold Butte area. We're up near Red Rock, south of Red Rock, near Good Springs. We're in all these different places, and so we want to make sure that what we're seeing with the plants, when the plants come up, was verified by the fact that the rodents are out there in abundance. So this is what we do: is we trap them in these little traps. We give them a little food, it attracts them. They're live trapped, they're not killed, and then they get a little mark the first night with black, and then we do it again the next night, and they get another mark with blue, and then the third night they get a little green. Some of them are very colorful after several nights, but that all comes off, it all washes off, and then they're okay. But this is just a really important part of it because it really shows us what's happening with the ants or with the rodents that are going on out there. Okay, and now the outplanting part. This is the third part. So I told you about the sowing treatment where the guys have the poles and they're putting the seed below ground. I talked about the diversionary seeding. And this is the outplanting, which happens this time of year. So starting now until about December, we're going to be taking all of this nursery raised seed stock, and now they're all these beautiful seedlings that are about 6 months old, and we're going to be planting them by hand. And as I said, each year we do about 30,000, and so it takes a lot of work. This is just showing you when we do our training. We've got the out there with the augers, and they're doing almost 30,000 holes that way. And you know, if you've ever dug in the desert, you've got rocks, and you've got caliche, you've got all sorts of stuff that make it really difficult to dig holes. But this is sort of the finished version here. This is the Bur Sage seedling, this is creosote seedling, and this is the Joshua tree seedling. Okay. So one thing that came up early on is, wow, this is a lot of soil. As Sarah mentioned, you can have 40 to 50 pounds if you're in a remote location. It's not like you can just, pull up in your RV. We have 30 people carrying these out to the desert to plant them because we want it to be in wild tortoise habitat. We don't need it by the road. We don't want the tortoises to be in the road. We want them to be out in their habitat. And so this requires a lot of work. One thing that restoration ecologists have done in the past is they said, well, if you take them out of the soil, you bare root them, and you wrap them in some wet material, you can actually keep them in that wet material for a couple days and then plant them without any negative effect. And actually sometimes can enhance their survivalship. And I was like, well, I don't know, desert conditions, you take that plant out of the ground, it's going to dry up, it's going to just be, it's dry out here. Matter of fact, it was 3% humidity. That's the lowest percent humidity about 3 or 4 days ago that I've ever seen in the Mojave Desert. So if you have a wet rag, you know how fast it's going to dry out if you have it exposed to the air. So I'm just thinking, I don't know about this, what's called jelly rolling, but as a scientist, I said, hey, let's test it. Let's see if it works. So that has been employing a lot of you all volunteering to help out with this jelly rolling technique and testing that in an experimental design. So we have been planting the seedlings just straight out of the pots. These are called plant bands. They don't have any bottoms to them. They're just a band of like plastic or wax-coated cardboard, and it's got soil in it. And when you stick it in a hole and you pull up that pot, it just the plant goes right into the hole, and then you pat it down and you put a little cairn around it to protect it from rodents and rabbits. But the other technique is actually taking it out of the soil and putting it in this moistened paper. And when we were starting this out, people said, well, some folks have used burlap. I've thought about, well, what can we use besides burlap? And so at the time, my dog was kind of getting towards the end of her life, and she needed wee-wee pads, so I went to the Costco or Petco and bought some wee-wee pads, and they're sure enough, you wet them and they absorb a lot of water, like 7 times the normal weight. And I thought, well, that's going to be great because you hold it up and the water doesn't come out, so that'll be a great environment for a plant that you're trying to transport. So that's what we've used so far. And so how does this process work? I just wanted to show you how that works in case you're able to help us and you don't know how it works. Step 1 is we gather the potted plants from the nursery. They're all there on site. We just load them up onto this little trailer here or push cart, and we bring them down to the space where we're working. We remove the plants from the soil. You probably recognize some of these folks. These are all tortoise group volunteers. And yeah, virtually, you're just taking them right out of that soil. That soil just drops away, and all you're left with that root system. Okay. Next step is we place the plants on the jelly roll. And again, it's just trying to preserve that root system as best as you can. We don't want to break any of that apart. And so we just line them all up, line up the plants, and then we fold over that paper, as doing here. And then we go ahead and roll them up, just like a jelly roll. And this was kind of timely because everybody was practicing for the holidays, getting their jelly roll technique practiced. And then they just get gently put into, each one of these has got about, depending on the species, between 4 and 15 plants per roll. And they get put into coolers, and a cold packet's put on there, and off they go. So how are we doing after the first year? I was like, okay, now how can I show you guys whether jelly rolling is working or not? I have just compiled a few slides here with data. I just did this, so it's not statistically analyzed or anything, but just to show you some general trends. And first of all, oh, no, go back. Phew, you almost revealed the answer before I was ready. I first wanted to say that we had no rain at these sites from October through January 5th. 0 rain. This is the time where we usually get about 2 inches of rain in the Mojave. And this is like a restoration ecologist's nightmare. It's like, oh man, you spend all this energy to put 30,000 plants into the ground and you get no rain. Well, I was really skeptical that this was going to work at all. Now, we had a lot of rain after January. January 6th, we had an inch of rainfall at most of these sites, which is really strange. It just all came at once. It wasn't spaced out like we'd like to see. So the question is jelly rolling having any impact? This is straight off the presses. Go ahead. I'm ready. Okay, I'm going to walk you through these slides. These are the 4 sites that we planted last year. Scenic West, which is up near Red Rock. Coyote Springs, which is where we were releasing the tortoises just last week. The Fork site, which is down in Gold Butte. And Good Springs, which is just south of Red Rock, if you're near the town of Good Springs. What these graphs show you is that this is 1 month, 2 months, and then a late winter and a late spring assessment of what's alive. Or actually, these graphs are going to show you what's dead. And I have these coded so that there's herbicide, which are the circles. The no herbicide is circles, and herbicides with triangles. But for the question of jelly rolling, you want to look at whether the symbols are black or white. The black ones showing below the white ones is what we want to see, because that shows that the mortality was lower in the jelly rolls compared to the ones that were planted from pots. And surprisingly, I was quite shocked, we are starting to see that trend. At Good Springs, all those black symbols, all those jelly rolls had lower mortality through time than those white symbols, which are the plants. We also saw it at Scenic West. Now, I don't know if these are statistically significant, but at least we're seeing some pattern. Yes, overall, we're seeing a lot of mortality because, again, it was a really difficult year. But the fact that we're seeing any kind of amelioration of that mortality with the jelly rolling is really fantastic. So this is the Bur Sage. And I've marked these with the red to show, just to draw your eye that these are the ones that are showing the jelly rolls having lower mortality than the ones in pots. And there's 3 sites. The Good Springs is really dramatic, right? It's like, wow, that's got to be statistically significant. Coyote Springs also showing that, and again, the Scenic West site. And then last but not least, the Yuccas, at least one of those sites is showing. Scenic West seems to be really consistent for all 3 species, that jelly rolling is having a really great effect. So this is really exciting, great news, because I am the biggest skeptic as a researcher. I just don't think anything is going to work. But this is really exciting to see this. Now, we haven't included the latest assessment that was done last month, but stay tuned and hopefully I can come back and tell you how that's going. Now, one thing that folks might say is, wow, the mortality in general was really high this year. Yes, it was because of our low rainfall. We anticipate we're not going to have 3 years like this in a row, because that's kind of unusual. We do get these periods where we get really difficult situations for plant growth, but we expect it's going to be better, and we want to see if having any rainfall, it makes the differences more pronounced between jelly rolls and planting by just the plant bands, or maybe it's going to have the opposite effect. We just don't know. So that's why it's really important that we have volunteers help us again. If we can drum up business to have volunteers help us, because this is such an important thing. If we know that jelly rolls are going to work, we can save an amazing amount of money. I mean, you could probably put 100 plants in a backpack and have 10 people going out and planting them by hand that way, as opposed to all the machinery that it requires to get all of that, all those plants that are in pots out to these field sites. So we continue in 2018, 2019, and then we'll be monitoring, again, the survivorship over 3 to 4 years beyond that. And I just wanted to say, put a plug for folks that are in this room that are interested in volunteering. I think we're talking about, you guys are going to send out the emails and everything, but just to give a heads up, we're talking about October 5th at the Song Dog Nursery. We're going to instead of doing the morning, we're going to do afternoon, so it'll be like noon to 3 time period, and we're going to try that out, see how it works, and then we'll have to adjust accordingly if it's not working well with people's schedules. But I hope that for folks that are really interested in preserving the wild tortoise's habitat, because you have that really intimate tie with your captive tortoises, you want the wild ones to live too, that you can help us with this effort, because we cannot do it without you. It's been a tremendous help to our research, and so I also thank you from the bottom of my heart. The tortoises thank you too. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Yes. Oh, these white pots you're talking about? Clay pots? Oh, the clay balls. I thought okay. The clay balls, they're supposed to disintegrate, and then as they disintegrate, they kind of just become soil, and then the seeds are left on the surface. So you saw in my photograph, I had sort of a wafer. I mean, we can go back to that, but if you go back to that photo, there was also a wafer, and the reason that is the case because I tested the clay balls in the plant chamber. I was doing some experimental studies in the laboratory, and the clay balls are really good at absorbing moisture, but they also release that moisture really quickly. So it causes more of a fluctuation in the water that's available to the seeds that are in there. And I found that they didn't actually, at least in a laboratory setting, didn't do a great job at supporting in our arid system that we have here. Now they work really well in rice paddies, which is where they were developed, and other mesic environments. But for us, I haven't seen that real positive effect that a lot of people talk about. That's why I came up with the wafer technique, which is really, it has more sand associated with it. It also has some absorbent crystals that absorb water like 7 times their weight, and then slowly releases that water to a developing seedling. And maybe sometime I can come back and talk about that. I haven't actually analyzed those data, but we are testing that in the field as well. Good question. Any other questions? Go ahead. So the question from Bob is, when we're doing the pole planting, are we concerned about spacing in between plants? We're applying a pretty high density of planting, and what we're hoping for is that if we get establishment, through time, the plants will sort of sort themselves out with competition and facilitation, and so we're really not worried at this point with the spacing. Is your question geared towards a potential negative effect of competition? Is that why you're asking? Or, yeah, we're just trying to get something on the landscape using these different techniques, and usually what will happen if you have a recruitment event, a natural event in seedlings getting on the landscape, they usually sort of sort themselves out. Some will die, some will live, and that causes the natural patterns that you see over time in the desert. Good question. I think there's another question over here. Yes? No. Another good question. No, we don't want the millet to grow. They told us that the millet was sterile, and we've tested some of it, and before we put it out there, and we found that there is a very small germination rate. So we spent 2 months cooking the seed and running experiments on how well we're at cooking the seed and then doing subsequent germination. And we got to a point, if you cook the seed at 310 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours, it kills it all. And so it kind of makes, we want the critters to use it to gather that seed plus the seed that we want them to plant. But we were really concerned, like, oh, it's a lot of seed, but we tested it and we found a way to kill it all so it won't take over. Yeah, great question. Any other? The Bureau of Land Management contracts that out, and so they put a contract out for bid, and then people bid on it. I don't know the company's name, but I think they're from Northern Nevada area, and they come in and they did it. Same group that did it last year. They're going to do it this year. Let me take this one here first. Yes, the BLM and the Fish and Wildlife work together on finding a time period where they expect the tortoises to be going under. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, good question. We put so much seed on a 1 hectare area that the variability within that, or from one handful to the next, probably won't matter. What we do is we make sure that each plot we have measured we've weighed all of the seed that's going to go on that plot prior to having all those people out there. So it's all very, very carefully weighed, so we know how many seeds are going to be on that 1 hectare plot. That's also the case with the outplanting. We count every single plant for each species. We know exactly, everyone is mapped, so we know exactly how many plants are going on there. So as a scientist, you have to track all of that. And in previous studies, done in the 70s and 80s, they weren't always tracking it to that detail. But we have to be able to track it so we understand what's going on with the rodents and the ants and the plants that are on the landscape, which species are establishing, which ones aren't. And so we do a lot of quantification prior to those guys even getting onto the landscape to start spreading the seed. They're powerhouses. I mean, they go and they want to just go and do it. But we have to know exactly how much seed is in each little postage stamp of space that's out there that we're restoring. So yes, very carefully measured. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for your patience, and I hope to see you out there jelly rolling.
Thank you, Lesley. That was awesome. And I have to tell you professionally, going out on Wednesday and then hearing Lesley talk, it makes me say, oh, we're doing something positive. A lot of times we feel like we're just putting our finger, in a giant dam that's about to burst, but we're doing really good stuff, and thank you, Lesley. That was a nice presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about sowing the tortoises. Now, if I sow them next week and they don't go down to December, how do they know when to sow them? They don't tell me when they're going to go down.
The question is how, Rosemary is asking how to know when to soak.
You can soak them within the next week or so. Basically, that's going to give them a nice time to flush their systems and just take in a new amount of water. So anytime between now and within the next month, and you should be looking at a good...
Okay, and there has been some discussion about not having water available all the time, like they used to say. So now are we wanting to have water available during these next few weeks for them to get into?
Yes.
Yes, and let me address that real quickly. So Rosemary asked about basically frequency of watering a pet tortoise. It seems that there's a high prevalence of bladder stones in pet tortoises, and we're judging that based off of how many bladder stones we're seeing in wild tortoises. The numbers are what, roughly 30% in captivity versus about 1 or 2% out in the wild. Now there's also the fact that we don't X-ray as many tortoises in the wild as we do in captivity, so there could be some actual observation issues. But one thing, and I've been real careful about this because we don't have any scientific information yet, but anecdotally it kind of makes sense. And the idea is this, that in the wild, a tortoise may go for an entire year without drinking water. And when a tortoise does drink water, it gorges, right? It just drinks everything that he possibly can. And then what happens is his system is full, or her system is full, and she flushes out all of the urates. And those of you that have had your tortoise for a while, I'm sure you've seen it at some point. Everybody kind of freaks out the first time they see it. It looks kind of pink, and it looks like there's little pieces of salt, and you're like, oh my God, my tortoise is bleeding out or something. That's a perfectly natural process. And in the wild, it happens several times a year. In captivity, what happens, and this is all anecdotal, so just follow me here. If you give your tortoise water all the time, the tortoise knows that, I don't need to gorge. I've got this nice little dish out here that I just can kind of sip at. And over a period of time, whatever that is, a couple years in captivity, then the tortoise realizes that it doesn't need to gorge. And because it's not gorging, it doesn't have a chance to push out the urates. Now, it makes sense, and it kind of follows along with what we're seeing in terms of bladder stones, because a bladder stone would be a direct result of not purging the system out. Having said all that, we're not telling anybody to change what you're doing. If we do, we'll make a very public thing. We'll put it on the website, and we'll let everybody know why we're saying this. But we're going to back it up with scientific data, and that's what we lack right now is scientific data. So don't change what you're doing. continue feeding and watering your tortoise exactly as you are, but definitely that wouldn't change anything going into brumation either. You want your tortoise to be nice and fat and full of water before brumation, regardless. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Question is how often? That's it's going to depend on your tortoise. So if you soak your tortoise, nice warm water, sits in there for 10-15 minutes the first time. Let's say it remains warm. You wait about 2 weeks. You put some more water out for your tortoise again. Your tortoise only stays in for about 4 or 5 minutes and wants to get out. Your tortoise will let you know. So it's really going to depend on your tortoise. And those of you that had tortoises for multiple seasons, you guys know it's difficult because the animal's telling you. You're not telling the animal. But just listen to your tortoise, and your tortoise will let you know. Yes, ma'am. Right on. Yes. I'm sorry? Oh, that wasn't a question. That was just a comment. Yes, ma'am.
I had goat come out and my burrow looks kind of like one of the pictures that was shown, but there was a board in there to pull out when he grows, and so he's grown, but the top layer is somewhat gaping, and I'm scared to pull it out. I'm scared the whole thing's gonna cave in.
So the question is about grow boards inside of a burrow. Your tortoise is getting large enough where you need to pull the grow board out, but you're afraid of sagging in the burrow. I would offer contact Sarah or I, and then we'll come to your house and just take a look. Yeah.
Great, and it still does, but I just don't want to mess anything up.
No, it's a perfect. Yeah. So you've got this habitat in your backyard. You want to make sure that you're taking care of your tortoise properly. 99 times out of 100, when we come to somebody's house, it's perfectly fine. And that's good. We'd rather have it that way. The only time I can think of is that woman 2 years ago where I was digging her tortoises out, and that's I dug a huge space, probably about 10 foot by 10 foot. She had 5 tortoises, and she had 2 of them. She didn't know where 3 of them were, and I dug and I dug and I dug, and sure enough, the other 3 were under bushes, and I'd cleaned out. I was there for all. Yeah, it was a big digging process. But it's good. But it's good to be on the safe side. So contact Sarah or I, and we'll set up a yard consultation. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yes, and the answer is 0. So that was actually part of Lesley's. Well, I take that back. It's not. Yeah.
How many?
63, yeah.
63.
That's a great question, because that touches on one of the other reasons why we don't want people to put tortoises out in the wild, is that the tortoises that are out in the wild already have a very, very limited supply of food and water. So if we dump out more tortoises into that area, then there's going to be competition for the existing resources. So the short answer to your question is, where we released those tortoises with USGS was a burned area. So it's an anomaly. That's not what typically the Mojave looks like. We wouldn't take 63 tortoises and just put them out into the Mojave. Answer your question?
Yeah, that was the first part.
Keep going.
How old was the tortoise that you put out?
We did it by size. So typically probably between about 3 and 5 years of age. Does that sound right? 3 and 5? So it was about 110, 100, a little smaller, between about 4.5 and 5 inches. What's that? And 80 grams in weight, yeah.
USGS had also run blood tests on these tortoises multiple times to test them for mycoplasma, which codes for upper respiratory infections and other diseases that are commonly seen in desert tortoises. So they were very confident that these were healthy tortoises going out. And then it was more dependent on the weight of the tortoise, which I believe was 80 grams. And they varied in sizes as well.
And then the last part of the question is, what kind of a burrow did you provide for the application?
The question was, what kind of burrow did the little guys and gals get? So that was, I did 5.
So what we tried to do is we tried to, we know from our previous work, because we've been looking at these areas since 2005 and 2006, that we know exactly where or how many burrows we have, tortoise burrows. We know how many rodent burrows. And so since these are smaller animals, there's a recent study that was just published that shows that a lot of the small juvenile tortoises will use kangaroo rat burrows. And so a lot of us, when we were out there, we were putting them in front of and setting them close to areas that had a lot of rodent burrows within a 2-meter radius. We were also using the yuccas. The burned out yucca bases were amazing little places for, they already had like a little depression underneath them that they could crawl underneath. And they've also found wild juvenile tortoises under the same kinds of cover sites. And so we tried to simulate where we would release them, make sure they had ample numbers of those kinds of cover sites when we release them. Yeah, anything to add?
So you actually did build a burrow? Okay.
No, in some of the rodent burrows, in the 5 that I put in, I dug out 4 of them. So the standard was basically half your arm, stick it in, if you could fit it in, then put the tortoise in. Most of them were about probably 6 to 8 inches deep. If you got the email that I sent on Friday, I believe, talking about this meeting, I included a picture, and I said you could just see the little transmitter. That's one of the ones that I did, and you can see in the picture it's actually a dead yucca tree right above it, and it created this nice little hole, and it was a perfect little potential burrow for the guy. Answer your question? Yeah, no, you're asking great questions, because we were very hesitant about even talking about this, because we don't want to confuse people and say, hey, look, we're taking 60 tortoises and putting them out in the desert. Yay, everybody can. But you're asking exactly the right questions. We want to make sure that people are not putting pet tortoises out into the wild, but this is a very controlled, it is an experiment. It's an ongoing research study. Every single one of those tortoises has a transmitter on them, and then we're going to get data from those tortoises from now until whenever funding stops, essentially. Yeah, it was at least, it was about 100 and 120 meters between each tortoise that we dropped off. 40 acres for 5 tortoises, yeah. So there's plenty of, it was a huge space that we were doing this in. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I know there are a lot of people who are now involved in tortoise groups. Sometimes I don't recognize it over here. But one thing that I do know is that most of the people who do have tortoise, their house is not involved with tortoise, I would say 95%. And so the number of tortoise that are in Las Vegas is far greater than the tortoise who has any concept of being
I would beg to differ, sir. The concept that we have is between 130 and 180,000 tortoises. And that's based off the census that we're doing. UNLV is compiling the data, and you're absolutely right. I wish we had 180,000 members. Then but no, you're absolutely right.
How many are there, 70 maybe?
I'm sorry?
How many members do you have, 70 maybe?
Oh, no. For 2018, we've got, I think, 650 members.
Really? That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Now, there are quite a few members in California. I would say there's probably 250 members or maybe 300 in California. And there's some folks up in Northern Nevada. And that's paid members. So the folks yeah, and so that's paid membership. The folks that come to the meetings, not everybody's a paid member. So, but I agree with you. There are oodles more people that have tortoises that don't even know about Tortoise Group. And it's not so much about Tortoise Group that I'm worried about. It's the folks that have tortoises that are getting wrong information on how to feed their tortoises, how to build a proper burrow. So I would encourage you and everybody in here, if you know somebody that has a tortoise, just refer them to our website. It's all free, and those of you that have lived in Las Vegas for a while, you guys know that the first rule of Tortoise Club, not Tortoise Group, but Tortoise Club, is you don't talk about Tortoise Club. Everybody's afraid of talking about their tortoise because they think they're going to get in trouble somehow. That's why we've been pushing registration the past year. We encourage folks to register. Once you register your tortoise, there is no legal activity that can mess with you and your tortoise. Everything, and it doesn't matter if you got 50 tortoises in your backyard. If you have 50, please build a bunch of barriers. We want to keep them separated. The whole idea is we don't want backyard breeding. We don't want backyard breeding. We want to take care of your pet. You love them. You love her. They're your little guys, right? But we don't want to create an overpopulation problem, which is now a direct threat to the wild population. Yes, ma'am.
Into your wild population, are they all
Are they all what?
they weren't big enough to be sterilized, so you have a fertile population.
Oh, the ones that we, the 60? Yeah, they're all, yeah. The question was, did we sterilize the tortoises that we put out into the wild? Was that your question?
Yeah, well, I assume that they're too little.
Yeah, they're too little. No. And those tortoises are fertile. Yep, they're a breeding population. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's a good question. I actually know the answer to that. So the question was, what happens if your tortoise eats that red brome? Christina Drake did a study, and it was more about brome in the wild in the Mojave. The short answer is that the seeds will pack up inside of a tortoise's mouth, and there's no nutritional value for red brome. So what ends up happening is that you get a bunch of just decay in a tortoise's mouth, and the seeds will just build up for a while, right? Little burrs inside. It's not good. No. No, not crabgrass, but they've got little nettles, and they'll stick to your, foxtail. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, sometimes it goes in the
Underneath what?
those plant you were just talking about.
Oh, okay. So the tortoise burrows underneath some plants. We'll do a yard consultation, and then we'll just take a look at your burrow and see how you had it set up. Yeah, it's probably not a bad thing. It's not something that you need to worry about. But long term, what happens is that it's not so much a tortoise eating the grass or eating the Bur Sage. It's not good for the tortoise, but it's kind of neutral. What the worst part is that grass takes up all the living space for all the other long-term plants that should be there. And that's more of a wild issue. It's not necessarily something in your backyard. Any other questions? Yes, sir. She doesn't like hot? To soak a tortoise? So the question, you've got a 40-year-old tortoise you just got this year. In terms of being hot, I can address that real quickly just by saying that a cold-blooded animal their temperature varies on the ambient temperature, right? So a tortoise doesn't want to be 100 degrees. As 100 degrees outside, the tortoise is going to try to find some space that's around 75, 80. Tortoises are just like us. They want to be around 75, 80 degrees. So if your tortoise is hot, that maybe you might need some more shade areas in your backyard or a burrow, with a little bit longer inside. In terms of, and I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the last part of your question? Oh, soaking, yeah. So soaking is a good idea, and you can do that with like a terracotta dish, or really a tub, any type of, yeah, a bathtub could work, just as long as the water level is not above his mouth, yeah, because that way what a tortoise is going to do is stick their mouth in the water, and then you'll see, like I got a couple hatchlings at home, and when they'll sit in the water, and the water actually kind of starts going down, and it's weird because the tortoise doesn't even move, but you can see him, they're just like, it's like he's got his head in the water, and then he just sucks it all up. So soaking is a good thing, and the cool thing about soaking is your tortoise will tell you when it's done, because they take in water through their mouth, but they also take in water through their cloaca, through osmosis. So a tortoise will they'll just kind of get nice and comfortable, and then they'll just sit for a while, and then as soon as they start moving around, they're telling you it's done. Yep. Soaking, what we recommend is usually a soak before brumation and after brumation. So before they go to sleep for the winter, and then soak them when they come out. And then really it just depends on you. If your tortoise is acting kind of funny, maybe you feel that for some reason it's not getting enough water, we would encourage you to soak your tortoise. I mean, this goes along the lines of watering versus overwatering. Right now, officially, we are saying more water. We err on the side of water, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with soaking a tortoise. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the question, animal abuse. Gentleman that was arrested for having all sorts of stuff in his house, and he had a tortoise. I don't know if you guys heard about this in Pahrump in Nye County. It's about a month and a half ago. Some guy drilled holes into the tortoise's shell and had like a hook. It was awful, awful. The DA's office, the sheriff, the Nye County sheriff picked up the tortoise, and somebody from the sheriff's department actually adopted the tortoise. So the tortoise is in good hands, and hopefully that guy's going to jail. I don't know what the status is on that person, but yeah, the tortoise is in good hands now. Any other questions? Lots of good questions today. All right, thank you guys for coming. We got one more meeting through the end of the year. If you haven't registered your tortoise, register your tortoise. Thank you to our volunteers, and we need volunteers. Have a good day, guys. Vote, yeah.